The Bermuda Triangle covers about 500,000 square miles of the Atlantic Ocean, between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico.
For nearly a century, the Bermuda Triangle has swallowed ships, planes, and explanations alike. Every theory thrown at it has eventually washed back onto shore, unproven, unfinished, unsatisfying. But that may be about to change, because when a team of researchers lowered the most advanced underwater drone ever built into the heart of that cursed stretch of ocean, they weren't hunting monsters, they weren't chasing ghost stories, they were running a routine deep-sea mapping operation. What came back up on their monitors was not routine at all. By the end of this video, you're going to see exactly what that drone captured at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle, and why scientists are calling it one of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of ocean exploration. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here. We cover stories like this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming. Let's go down. The drone and the mission setup. The vehicle at the heart of this mission was far more advanced than a typical research submersible. It was purpose-built to operate in the extreme conditions the Bermuda Triangle is known for: crushing pressure, complete darkness, and seafloor terrain that had never been fully explored or accurately mapped. Equipped with powerful, high-intensity floodlights, the drone could pierce the pitch-black depths where sunlight has never reached. Its pressure-resistant cameras were engineered to withstand forces that would crush ordinary equipment in an instant. Advanced sonar systems continuously scanned the ocean floor, creating a detailed three-dimensional map, 1 meter at a time, while articulated robotic arms allowed operators to collect samples from anything unusual they encountered during the dive. Ironically, the mission itself began as a routine scientific survey. A research vessel had been assigned to map a section of the seabed within the Bermuda Triangle as part of a broader deep ocean recovery project. It was the kind of careful, methodical work that rarely attracts public attention. The crew expected to find little more than sediment, rocky outcrops, and perhaps pieces of wreckage from the many ships that had disappeared in the region over the years. The plan couldn't have been simpler. Descend, map the seafloor, record the data, collect samples if necessary, and return to the surface before the day was over. But within just a few hours, everything changed. The live footage coming back from the drone revealed something so unexpected that it transformed an ordinary research mission into one of the most talked about scientific discoveries in years, igniting debate among experts and capturing the imagination of people around the world. The myth behind the mission. To understand why this discovery hit so hard, you need to understand what the Bermuda Triangle actually represents, not just as a location, but as an idea that has lived in the human imagination for generations. Since the mid-20th century, this roughly triangular stretch of the Atlantic, bounded loosely by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has been blamed for the disappearance of dozens of ships and aircraft. Flight 19, a squadron of Navy bombers that vanished in 1945 without a trace, remains the most famous case, but it's far from the only one. Over the decades, explanations have piled up. Some blame sudden, violent weather systems that form quickly and disappear just as fast. Others point to magnetic anomalies that could, in theory, throw off compass readings. There's a theory involving methane gas eruptions from the seafloor. Pockets of gas that, if released suddenly, could reduce water density enough to sink a ship without warning. And of course, there's the simplest explanation of all. Heavy shipping traffic in a hazardous stretch of ocean naturally produces more accidents. No supernatural cause required. Serious researchers have picked apart the wilder claims for years. Statistically, the Triangle doesn't lose more vessels than any other heavily trafficked, storm-prone body of water. And yet, the unease never fully lifted. There was always a nagging sense that something about this particular patch of ocean sat differently in the collective mind, not because of the numbers, but because of what those numbers couldn't explain. For 70 years, every theory about the Triangle looked upward, at storms, at compasses, at the surface where the disappearances happened. This mission was the first real attempt to look down. The descent. The drone entered the water just after dawn, its hull catching the last clean light before the ocean took over. The first 100 meters looked like any other dive. Bright surface chop gave way to a soft turquoise glow. By 600, there was no light left at all, except what the drone carried with it. The cameras kept rolling regardless. Marine snow, tiny flecks of organic debris, drifted endlessly through the beam, like slow static, falling through an empty room. Every so often, a pulse of bioluminescence would flare somewhere at the edge of the frame and vanish before anyone could identify what caused it. Above the drone, its tether stretched up into a darkness so complete it seemed to simply disappear, as though the machine had quietly been cut loose from the surface world entirely. In the control room, the operators kept their voices low and clipped, the practiced calm of people trained not to react to strange readings. But that calm was tested as the sonar began returning something nobody had prepared for. Instead of the flat, uneventful basin they expected, the seafloor below was rising and falling in sharp, deliberate-looking contours, sudden walls, unexplained recesses, a terrain that looked less like an ocean floor and more like the broken remains of something that used to stand upright. Then, at just past 4,000 meters, the drone touched down. The shape. The first thing that stunned the control room wasn't movement, it was shape. As the drone's lights swept slowly across the seabed, a formation began to emerge out of the sediment haze. And it did not look like ordinary geology. Long ridges of stone-like material ran in intersecting lines, meeting each other at angles that felt too clean, too deliberate to be an accident of erosion. Broad, flat surfaces stretched out like terraces, each one partially buried under centuries of silt and mineral crust. One especially wide, level expanse immediately drew comparisons to a plaza, a flat, open space consumed by sediment, but still recognizably flat, in a way the surrounding seafloor wasn't. Around it ran narrow trenches that looked disturbingly like corridors, cutting between the raised sections in straight, purposeful lines. At the center of the mapped area sat a circular depression, ringed by a series of upright shapes standing at roughly even intervals, dark, motionless, worn smooth by time, but unmistakably vertical in a place where nothing should stand on its own. Back on the surface, the scientific instinct kicked in immediately. Nature can produce surprising order. Pressure, heat, and geological time can carve strange things. But what the cameras were showing didn't look like an isolated fluke. It looked repeated, patterned, related, and that was only the beginning. The geometry problem. As the sonar scans continued to stream in alongside the live video feed, the mood inside the control room began to shift. What initially looked like ordinary sea floor started revealing patterns that were difficult to ignore. The same rectangular outlines kept appearing again and again at different locations across the site. The team repeatedly measured the distances between several raised formations, expecting natural variation. Instead, The measurements came back remarkably consistent every time, as though they had been built using a common unit of measurement, rather than formed through random geological processes. One long ridge stretched in an almost perfectly straight line for an extraordinary distance. Even the most cautious geologists on board found it increasingly difficult to dismiss such precision as a simple coincidence. In another area, the drone captured a series of stepped, layered formations rising from the seabed. Each level appeared slightly smaller than the one beneath it, creating a sequence that looked far more like deliberate construction than the uneven effects of erosion and shifting sediment. The deeper the investigation went, the harder it became to explain away what the instruments were recording. The drone had been sent to map an ordinary stretch of ocean floor, documenting rocks, sediment, and natural features. Instead, they looked very different from the random branching patterns typically created by coral, erosion, or mineral deposits. One particularly large slab displayed a series of parallel lines that suddenly bent at a sharp angle, almost as if they outlined the edge of a carefully planned structure. Nearby, another rock face revealed a repeating sequence of recessed shapes spaced at remarkably even intervals. For a brief moment, those shapes looked strikingly similar to symbols or markings, but before the operators could get a closer look, the current shifted. Clouds of sediment filled the water, and the view disappeared. The drone never remained steady long enough to determine whether the patterns were truly significant or simply an unusual trick of nature. This is a good moment to ask you, what do you think those markings really are? Could they be nothing more than natural fracture patterns formed over thousands of years? Or do you believe they point to something more? Share your theory in the comments. I read them all, and I'm curious to see what you think before we reveal what happened next. Because just a few minutes later, the drone encountered something that completely changed the direction of the mission and turned an ordinary scientific survey into a discovery nobody on board was prepared for. The opening, an interior revealed. Between two of the larger stone masses, the drone's lights swept across a gap, and behind it, a cavity that immediately looked different from everything else on the site. This wasn't a jagged, irregular crack in the rock. It was framed, wide at the base, narrowing gradually toward the top, its edges distinct and continuous, even under a heavy coating of marine growth. As the drone eased closer, sediment stirred up by its thrusters swirled around the opening, and for a few seconds, the beam reached inside. What it lit up wasn't solid stone. It was empty space, extending back farther than the light could fully reach. Standing inside that darkness were vertical forms, spaced at even intervals, arranged almost exactly like support columns inside a hall. One of the drone's side cameras caught a brief angle on the floor of the space. It was noticeably flatter than the seabed outside, broken by long, straight seams running across it. For everyone watching the feed live, that was the moment the mission changed. This wasn't just an unusual rock formation anymore. It looked like the inside of something. The question nobody can answer. Here's where the story gets genuinely difficult, because nobody involved in this mission has been able to answer the question everyone immediately started asking. Is this the remnant of a civilization that existed before rising sea levels buried this stretch of the Atlantic beneath hundreds of meters of water? Is it an extraordinary natural formation, one so precisely layered by geological accident that it only looks built? Or is it something that simply doesn't fit cleanly into either category? A site that belongs neither to established science nor to old legend, but to something in between. The drone didn't answer any of those questions. It couldn't. Its job was never to interpret, only to record. But by capturing what it did, it made those questions impossible to avoid any longer. And the deeper into the site it traveled, the harder those questions became to set aside. More structures. The field widens. As the drone continued its sweep, more features emerged from the sediment. A cluster of cylindrical shapes projected up from the seabed, each one wider at the base and tapering slightly toward the top. One had toppled over and split lengthwise, exposing an interior texture completely different from its weathered outer surface. Another stood, partially buried beside what looked like the remains of a broken platform. Along one edge of the site, the drone passed over a row of massive rectangular blocks lying end to end, separated by narrow, almost perfectly even gaps. The alignment was clean enough that even team members who'd spent the whole mission urging caution found themselves struggling to explain it away in the moment. Scattered around the larger formations was smaller debris, but even that debris seemed to follow a pattern, radiating outward as if it had collapsed from something, rather than simply settling there over time. And there was one more detail that stuck with everyone watching. The area around the central structures was strangely empty of life. In most deep-sea footage, the frame is full of movement, fish drifting through, small creatures crawling across the seabed. Here, the immediate area around the core formations felt oddly still, almost deliberately quiet, like the site itself was set apart from everything around it. The gateway shot. Then came the image that, more than any other, has defined this discovery in every headline since. The drone's lights swept across a long wall, rising up from the seafloor, broken in the middle by a gap framed on either side by two taller, upright masses. Beyond that gap, nothing but darkness. It wasn't a cave mouth. It wasn't a random fracture in the rock. The proportions were too balanced, too intentional. It looked unmistakably like a threshold. And as the drone held its position for just a few seconds, fine sediment drifted slowly through the opening, curling through the gap, like smoke moving through an old forgotten doorway. There's a reason that single shot has spread further than any other frame from this mission. Human beings respond to entrances on an almost instinctive level. A doorway means something on one side is being kept apart from the other. Concealment, invitation, warning, all at once. To find that shape sitting at the bottom of the Bermuda Triangle, in a place sunlight has never touched, was to come face to face with something that felt less like an ocean floor and more like the edge of somewhere we were never meant to see. The scientific and cultural fallout. If this footage holds up under closer examination, the implications reach far beyond one strange site in the Atlantic. Geologists will need to determine whether unusual tectonic stress or mineral formation processes could, under the right conditions, produce this level of consistent geometry naturally. Oceanographers will be looking at current patterns and sediment behavior in the region to see whether natural forces alone could carve something this structured. And archaeologists will have to seriously grapple with a question that's been quietly circling for decades. Could parts of the Atlantic continental shelf have supported human activity before sea levels rose and buried them? Because if the answer is yes, even partially, then this isn't just a strange discovery. It's a challenge to how we've mapped the history of human settlement in this entire ocean basin. There's a broader lesson buried in all of this too. We tend to think of the world as fully charted. Every coastline mapped, every depth measured, every mystery eventually reducible to an explanation. This footage is a quiet reminder that knowing a place exists on a map is not the same as actually knowing what's inside it. The ocean has always kept more of the past hidden than the land ever could. This might just be the first real glimpse of how much. Myth-made material. For most of its history, the Bermuda Triangle has been a story about disappearance, about what the ocean takes and never gives back. This footage quietly rewrites that story. It suggests the triangle's power was never only about what vanishes into it. It may also be about what's been resting beneath it the entire time, undisturbed, waiting for the right piece of technology to finally shine a light into the dark. Nothing about this discovery has been proven. No civilization has been confirmed. No definitive answer has been reached. And honestly, it might be a long time before one is. But that's exactly what makes it so hard to look away from. The drone didn't solve the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. It just made sure for the first time that we finally know where to look. Outro. So that's the story. The drone's descent, the mysterious discovery, and the evidence that's forcing scientists to take a fresh look at one of the most famous and least understood regions of the ocean. Now it's your turn. What do you think is really hiding down there? Could it be the remains of a forgotten civilization, an extraordinary natural formation, or something we've never encountered before? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely read every one, and I'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this journey into one of Earth's greatest mysteries, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into the world's most fascinating discoveries. There are still countless secrets waiting beneath the waves, and we're only beginning to uncover them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.